Shabbat Shalom, first of all, to everyone. I don't know if I had an opportunity to wish you, each and every one of you, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for being here on the long weekend. Originally thought we were maybe 15 people. Now it looks like we've doubled or even more than doubled, so that feels good. And it's nice to be here as community. As you know, earlier we were talking about the idea of celebrating the Chagim and each joyful occasion together. We don't pray alone and we don't celebrate alone. So coming in person is important. So let's look at a brief summary of today's Parsha. The name of the Parsha is Re'eh. See. It's found in Deuteronomy 11:26. See, says Moses to the people of Israel, I place before you a blessing and a curse. The blessing that will come when you fulfill the commandments, and the curse if you abandon them. These should be proclaimed on Mount Gerizim. In Hebrew, mount is Har, and Mount Ebal, Har Ebal, when the people cross over into the Holy Land. Many of you who have been to Israel on a tour may have actually gone to see these mountains that are in Samaria. So there are two mountains in Samaria near the Jordan River. The former, Har Gerizim was fertile, and Har Ebal was barren, which made them ideal setting for announcing the blessings of the curse and the blessing in the Torah. The Israelites were commanded to pronounce these blessings on these mountains because they're symbolic, the consequences of obedience and disobedience of God's commandments. In Deuteronomy, Moses instructs the Israelites on the significance of the mountains as they prepare to enter the promised land. And in Judaism, a lot of things, physical objects, are symbolic of the higher level concepts. As Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains in one of his Divrei Torah on this Parsha, this Torah reading, Moses tries to explain to the children of Israel that they must keep in sight the big picture that the specific commandments represent. The mountain of Har Gerizim is a mountain of plenty. It represents goodness and bounty. Har Ebal is parched. Nothing grows on it, and that in itself is a curse. He uses these mountains to symbolize the big picture and the vision of a society where all can thrive. He wants them to understand that the commandments are a means of achieving the blessing. The Parsha continues to explain that a temple should be established in the place that God will choose to make his dwelling there. And there is actually a spin-off group of the Jewish people, of the Samaritans, that actually built their temple on Har Gerizim, and it can be found there today. The temple that we built in Jerusalem was a place where God's offerings were made, the animal sacrifices, and it was forbidden to do this anywhere else. It was permitted to slaughter animals elsewhere, but only to eat them and not to offer them to God. A commentary on this passage reminds us that many of the peoples who were surrounding the Israelites practiced idol worship and human sacrifice. So the laws had to be very strict on how and when animal sacrifice was carried out. God feared that the children of Israel would be lured into following these practices that would ultimately lead to their downfall and destruction of the society as a whole. And for this reason, and some of you may have read the English, the punishment for leading people astray was very harsh. A false prophet who enticed someone to worship idols would be put to death, and an idolatrous city would be destroyed, just like Sodom and Gomorrah. The Parsha goes on to identify the kosher animals and fish and the list of non-kosher birds. It explains the prohibition to eat blood, and that blood represents life itself. Again, there are specific actions that we do that symbolize a way of wanting to do better and be better. So by what we eat, we symbolize a desire to eat gentler creatures, and that blood itself and spilling blood must be done with great care if we are to eat of that animal. As you know, if you have seen the practice of kosher meat, we always salt it to remove all of the blood. The Parsha also then goes on to give specific rules on how to feed the poor and look after those who do not own land that produces food. A tenth of all produce must be eaten in Jerusalem, where the Kohanim and Levites lived, and they could not produce their own food. And if the food wasn't eaten in Jerusalem, it must be exchanged for money that would be then used to purchase food. And in certain years, this tithe is given to the poor instead. Firstborn cattle and sheep are to be offered to the temple, and their meat eaten by the Kohanim, the priests. Very specific rules. It doesn't just say be charitable, it gives an explanation of how to perform it and specific rules of how it's to be done. The mitzvah of charity, tzedakah, which is not quite charity because it's not if you feel like it, it's actually a commandment. It obligates a Jew to aid a needy fellow or give a loan. And on the sabbatical year, occurring every 7 years, loans are to be forgiven, so you get a second chance to get out of a cycle. All indentured servants are set free after 6 years of service. It's interesting to note that the big picture vision that Moses describes is one of an ideal society that cares for the weakest and most vulnerable of its inhabitants. A society where everyone can have an opportunity to have a second chance and to flourish. This vision is what is meant when Moses talks about the blessing. As any good business person knows, and as you know, I have a business and communication background, so I'm always taking it back to those concepts. Any vision that is not accompanied by a strategy explaining the steps and practices required to accomplish the vision will not succeed. Moses wants the people to understand the big picture and the commandments that are the means to achieve that vision. Our Parsha concludes with the laws of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, when we should go to see and be seen. Yes, you want other people to see that you're there. You become also a role model and an example. There's lots of small details in all of the laws and rules that are described in the Parsha. And as I explained a few weeks back, some of the laws make sense, like not killing or stealing, while others, and many of the other laws that we spoke about today, are not so easy to comprehend because they have a more abstract meaning. So once again, if you recall, mishpatim are those commandments that have a rational explanation. It's very clear why we're not going to kill and why we're not going to steal. Chukim are those commandments that don't have a rational explanation, but that represent something. So many of the laws we talked about today are chukim, and they may not have made a lot of sense to the people at that time who were surrounded by societies that had practices that we do not approve of today. And as our society matures, the reasons for the chukim become more apparent, and we understand that they are symbolic. They're meant to reinforce a concept through symbolic action. Now, as my young adult daughter mentioned at the Shabbat dinner table last night, our ritual practices are meant to raise awareness and fine-tuning and open us up to receive the potential of God's creation. According to halacha, we are born with both an animal and a godly soul. As we are material beings, we can elevate our physical world and basic drives by creating awareness and appreciation of the world around us through blessings and prayer. That's why we make a blessing over the wine before drinking it. We stop for a moment before blessing the bread, making hamotzi. We take a moment to have gratitude. We show this gratefulness and appreciation and awareness. And this is the blessing that Moses was referring to when he says, Re'eh, see, pay attention. So how do we transmit this message today? One of the vectors of communication today is culture, pop music. And I was at the lake last weekend and we were listening to a local radio station. And sadly, I noted that a lot of the music that our young people are listening to has frightening subliminal messages that dying, for example, is a better option than separating from a partner. I could have died in your arms tonight, or I would die for you, or worse yet, I would kill that other woman who's the competition. This is frightening and not a good message to give a 14-year-old girl who's love-struck. Think about the messages. Think about the messages that our songs and our liturgy are giving us. I mean, you might be reading the English in our prayer book today. Those are beautiful messages about being accepting, all of the paths leading to peace, hopefulness. So when we read the Shema, it tells us, how do we transmit these good messages? We talk about them when we walk down the way, when we rise up, when we lie down. Talk about them to our children. Warn our children that there are toxic messages out there. Those toxic messages are like those idolatrous societies that the Torah talks about in today's Parsha. And try to choose the music that you want to listen to and the messages that are meaningful to us as a people and as a society. So with that message, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.